my fiancé said during a taxi ride through Dubai. I think I'm still figuring out what I truly want. I told her discovery deserves space, canceled our honeymoon reservations, and focused my attention on a career path waiting on another continent. I think I'm still figuring out what I truly want. She said it like it was nothing, like she was deciding between entrees at a restaurant. Like those 7 words didn't just detonate something inside my chest that I'd spent 2 years building. The taxi smelled like synthetic oud and air conditioning. Outside, Dubai's skyline was lit up like a fever dream. Glass towers catching the last bleed of orange from the sky. The driver had some low Arabic melody playing through cracked speakers, and Camille was looking out the window when she said it. Not at me, at the city, like she was making a confession to the skyline instead of to the man sitting 12 inches away from her with a ring on her finger. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. I watched the Burj Khalifa disappear behind a line of construction cranes as we turned a corner. And I thought, very quietly, very clearly, so this is where it ends. Not with a fight, not with a dramatic scene, not with tears or screaming or accusations thrown across a room, but in the back of a taxi, with a melody I didn't understand, and a skyline that didn't care. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 31. She was 29. We'd been together for 2 years and engaged for 4 months. The Dubai trip was supposed to be a celebration before the real celebration. A pre-honeymoon honeymoon, she'd called it. We'd fly home in 3 days. Get married in 6 weeks. That was the plan. That was the plan until 4 minutes ago. I'd met Camille at a product conference in Amsterdam. She worked in brand strategy. I worked in infrastructure development for a mid-sized logistics firm. We were both at the same panel discussion about sustainable supply chains. She rolled her eyes at the moderator's third buzzword in 60 seconds. I noticed. I leaned over and whispered, "He's going for a record." She laughed without making any sound, which somehow made it funnier. We got coffee after the panel, then dinner. Then she missed her train back to Brussels. I want to be honest about something. The beginning with Camille was genuinely good. Not just exciting or new. Actually good. She was sharp. She saw things in people quickly. She had a way of listening where she'd tilt her head slightly, like she was physically trying to absorb what you were saying. I fell for that. I fell for all of it. By the time we'd been together 6 months, I'd started thinking long-term. By 12 months, I'd started thinking permanent. At 18 months, I bought the ring. A simple platinum band with a single cushion-cut stone. Nothing excessive. She told me once that she found ostentatious jewelry uncomfortable. I remembered. I always remember the small things. She said yes. We cried. Her mother called. My father sent a voice note that lasted 3 minutes and was mostly him clearing his throat between emotional sentences. It was the best night I could remember. That was 4 months ago. In the months between the engagement and Dubai, things had started to shift. Not dramatically. Not in ways that would have been easy to point at. But I felt it. Like a door in a house that used to swing freely starting to catch on the frame. Not stuck. Just not quite right. She started canceling plans more. Not constantly, but enough. She'd come home from work and go quiet in a way that felt different from tired. It felt like absent. Like she was physically in the room but had set herself somewhere else entirely. I asked about it twice. The first time, she said she was stressed about a campaign pitch at work. I believed that. The second time, she said she just needed some space to breathe and that I was reading into nothing. I believed that less. But I didn't push. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself that relationships have seasons. I told myself a lot of things. 2 weeks before Dubai, we had dinner with her friends, Petra and Renaud. It was supposed to be a casual evening. Good wine, easy conversation, wedding talk. Petra asked Camille how the planning was going. Camille smiled. "We're getting there," she said. Petra pushed further. "Are you excited?" And Camille paused. It was brief. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But I was watching her. I was always watching her. "Of course," she said. And she reached across the table and touched my hand. But the pause was there. And I filed it. Quietly. In the part of my brain I'd been trying not to open. Dubai was beautiful in the way that feels slightly unreal. Everything is too tall, too clean, too deliberate. Like a city that decided it was going to be impressive and then simply refused to stop. The first 2 days were genuinely good. We walked through the old souk. She bought a tiny brass compass. I bought a leather journal I told myself I'd actually use this time. We ate at a place in Dara that had no English menu and the food was extraordinary. She laughed easily. She held my hand through crowded streets. On the second night, we sat on the hotel balcony and watched the city below us, and she put her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm glad we came." I believed her. I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe the distance I'd been sensing was just pre-wedding nerves. Maybe I'd been amplifying things that weren't there. Maybe this trip was exactly what we needed. I was wrong about being wrong. The third day was quieter. She slept in. I went for a run along the marina. When I came back, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in her hands, not looking at the screen, just holding it. I asked if she was okay. She said yes. She said she was just thinking. About what? I asked. She said nothing specific. We spent the afternoon at the Dubai frame, standing between old Dubai and new Dubai on a glass floor 300 feet up. It's a strange feeling. You can see both directions at once, past and future separated by the width of a bridge. I didn't know I'd remember that later as a metaphor. That evening we had dinner at a rooftop restaurant. The food was good. The conversation was careful, not cold, just careful, like we were both avoiding a particular room in the house. She had 2 glasses of wine. I had 1. We took a taxi back to the hotel. That's when she said it. I think I'm still figuring out what I truly want. No preamble, no context, just that. I counted 3 full seconds before I responded. Not because I was calculating, because I genuinely needed them. What does that mean for us? I asked. She didn't look at me. It means I've been feeling uncertain, she said. About the wedding? About everything. I watched the city move outside the window. A fountain lit in blue. A group of tourists with cameras. A man in a white Kenduro walking alone. Is there someone else? I asked. It was the first place my mind went. I'm not proud of that, but it was honest. No, she said. Quickly. No, it's nothing like that. Then what is it like? I asked. She finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in her face wasn't cruelty. It wasn't indifference. It was something that looked almost like exhaustion, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and was only now admitting the weight. I don't know if I'm ready, she said. For marriage. For this version of my life. I want to tell you that I stayed composed because I was strong. That would be a nicer story. The truth is I stayed composed because I went somewhere else in my head. Some quiet, clear place that kicks in when the emotional volume gets too high. It's not a gift. It's a defense mechanism I developed a long time ago. But it served me in that moment. When did this start? I asked. It's been there for a while, she said. How long is a while? She didn't answer immediately. A few months, she said finally. A few months. The engagement was 4 months old. So essentially from the beginning. The ring had barely stopped being new when doubt moved in alongside it. I looked out the window again. You could have told me, I said. I kept thinking it would pass, she said. Did it? She looked at her hands. No. The taxi pulled up to the hotel. The driver turned around with a polite, professional expression. I paid. We got out. We walked through the lobby in silence. Marble floors and the smell of something floral and expensive. We rode the elevator to the 14th floor without speaking. She used her key card to open the room. We went inside. The skyline through the window was still doing its thing. Indifferent and magnificent. I sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. Same position I'd found her in that morning. I wondered how long she'd been sitting like that before I came back from my run. I need to understand what you're asking for, I said. I'm not asking for anything specific, she said. You're implying something specific, I said. She put her hands in her lap. I think I need time to understand myself better. Before the wedding. Before everything. I nodded slowly. Not agreement. Just acknowledgement. Then that's what you should have, I said. She looked up. She seemed almost surprised. That's not me giving up on you, I said. That's me recognizing that if you're sitting here uncertain after 2 years, then more time isn't going to hurt either of us. You're not angry? She asked. And I thought about that. Was I angry? There was something compressed and sharp, but it wasn't quite anger. It was more like grief with clean edges. I'll probably feel a lot of things later, I said. But right now I'm just listening. We talked for another 2 hours. Not the kind of talking that resolves things. The kind that lays things out in the open so you can at least see them clearly. She told me she'd been feeling like she'd jumped from one chapter of her life directly into the next without stopping between them. She told me she loved me. She said that like it was the most complicated part. She told me she wasn't sure that love was enough when the rest of herself felt so unfinished. I asked her what unfinished looked like. She struggled to name it. She said something about identity. About a version of herself she felt like she'd paused somewhere in her mid-20s when she got serious about career and relationships. She said she sometimes felt like she was performing a life rather than living it. I listened. I asked questions. I did not try to solve her. There's a version of that conversation where I try to fix it, where I promise changes I'm not sure I can keep, where I convince her that her uncertainty is just fear and fear can be pushed through. I've seen that conversation. I've watched it work temporarily and fail permanently. I didn't want that. That night, I slept on my side of the bed with a careful distance between us. She cried a little around 2 in the morning. I heard it. I didn't reach for her, not because I didn't care, but because I understood that this wasn't a sadness I could absorb. This was hers, and it needed to stay with her long enough for her to actually feel it. The next morning I woke up early. I sat with my coffee on the balcony before she was awake. I made 2 lists in my head. Not literally. I'm not a bullet point kind of person, but 2 categories. Things that were her responsibility to figure out, and things that were mine. Her uncertainty was hers. What I did with mine was mine. And sitting on that balcony with the early morning Dubai heat already beginning to build, I made a decision. Not out of spite, not out of pain, out of something closer to self-respect. 2 months before Camille had said she was figuring herself out, I had been offered a position with a firm in Vancouver. Infrastructure development, but at a scale I'd never worked at before. Coastal transit corridors, multi-government coordination, the kind of project that comes once, if it comes at all. I'd been flattered. I'd also been engaged. I told the hiring director that I appreciated the offer, but that my personal circumstances made relocation difficult. He told me the position was open for 60 days and that he hoped circumstances would allow. He was professional about it. He meant it. I'd thought about it once or twice since then, but always filed it under a door that closed. Sitting on that balcony in Dubai, I reopened the file. When Camille woke up, I told her I'd been thinking. She came out to the balcony with her own coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept well. I probably looked the same. I meant what I said last night. I said, your need to figure things out is real, and it deserves real space. She nodded. That space can't coexist with a wedding 6 weeks from now, I said. She didn't argue. So, I'm going to cancel the reservations today. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not relief. Not regret. Something in between. All of them, she said. The venue, the catering, the hotel block, I said. I'll handle the calls. That's a lot of money lost, she said quietly. Some of it, yes, I said. Some of it we'll get back. I'm sorry, she said. And I believed she meant it. I know, I said. I spent 3 hours on my phone that morning. She went for a walk. I think we both needed the space. I called the venue first. A converted lighthouse on the Normandy coast we'd booked 9 months earlier. The coordinator was kind. She'd heard this before, clearly. She walked me through the cancellation policy with practiced gentleness. We lost 30% of the deposit. I didn't argue. Then the catering company. Then the hotel accommodation block. Then the photographer, a woman based in Paris who I genuinely liked, and who sent back a brief, gracious note that made the whole thing harder somehow. Then the florist. Then the string quartet Camille had found through a referral from a colleague. Then the transport company. By the time I finished, Camille was back. She'd brought pastries from somewhere downstairs. She put them on the small table between us. Neither of us ate immediately. It's done, I said. She nodded. Thank you for doing that, she said. It was my responsibility too, I said. And that was the truth. Not everything that breaks is one person's fault. Some things break together. We flew home 2 days later. The return flight was quiet in the way that flights are when both people are inside themselves. I watched 2 movies I won't remember. She read something on her Kindle. We ate the meal they brought without commenting on it. When we landed and went through customs separately and came back together at the luggage carousel, something had already shifted in the geometry of us. We were no longer 2 people planning a future. We were 2 people figuring out what came next. Her with her questions. Me with mine. We didn't break up immediately. I want to be clear about that. Because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scene. It was a series of smaller acknowledgments that added up to the same thing. We stopped referring to the future in first-person plural. We stopped making plans further than a week out. She moved some things back to her apartment. She'd been spending most nights at mine for the past year, but technically still kept her own place. I noticed when the second drawer in my bathroom went from full to mostly empty. I didn't say anything. The ring didn't come back formally. It just stopped appearing on her hand. She didn't make a moment of it. I didn't ask about it. That's how some things end. Not with a formal conclusion. With a slow fading, like a radio station you drive away from. About 2 weeks after Dubai, I sent an email to the hiring director in Vancouver. His name was Tobias. Tobias Fletcher. I'd kept his contact information in a folder I labeled Deferred. I opened it on a Tuesday night when the apartment was quiet in a way that had recently started feeling more like alone than like peace. I wrote something simple. I told him I'd been thinking further about the offer, that my personal circumstances had changed, that if there was still a version of the conversation to be had, I was interested in having it. I hit send before I could second guess it. He replied the next morning. He said the position had been filled. My stomach dropped. Then he said that a second track had opened up on the same corridor project. Different scope, similar level, and that he'd been hoping I might circle back. He asked if I could take a call that week. I said yes. I didn't tell Camille about the Vancouver call immediately, not because I was hiding it. We were in an undefined space. We still spoke, sometimes daily. We had coffee twice in those 2 weeks. It was always a little tender and a little careful, like moving around furniture you're not sure whether you're keeping or throwing out. She was figuring things out. I was beginning to figure things out too, just in a different direction. The call with Tobias lasted 90 minutes. He was thorough and direct, which I respected. He talked through the project, a multi-phase coastal transit development connecting several municipalities north of Vancouver. The kind of infrastructure project that gets cited in academic papers a decade later. The kind of work that changes how people live. He talked through the team, the timeline, the relocation package. I asked a lot of questions. Not hesitant questions. Real ones. Questions about governance structure. About contractor relationships. About how much autonomy senior developers had in the scoping phase. He answered all of them well. By the end of the call, I knew I was going to accept. I didn't say that out loud. I told him I needed a few days to review the formal offer document. He said he understood. He sent it over that evening. I read it twice before bed. The next morning I call my father. He lives in Porto. He's been there for 20 years. He moved after my parents divorced and built a life there that he's genuinely happy with. He knows me well, not in the way that parents who were present every day know you, but in the way that people who had to pay close attention to make up for distance know you. He picked up on the third ring. I told him about Dubai, about the conversation in the taxi, about the cancellations, about the way the last month had felt. He was quiet in the way he gets when he's listening properly. When I finished, he said, "How do you feel? Not what are you going to do? Not what happened. How do you feel?" Like I'm standing between a door that just closed and one that's about to open, I said. Then walk toward the open one, he said. It's in Vancouver, I said. He laughed, a short, surprised laugh. How far is that from Portugal, he said. About as far as it gets, I said. Good, he said. Distance teaches you things that proximity never can. I believed him. He would know. I told Camille about Vancouver on a Thursday evening. She'd come over to pick up some books she'd left. She was wearing a coat I hadn't seen before. Something new. An unbothered kind of new. Like she'd been shopping for herself in the way you do when you're rediscovering who you are outside a relationship. I noticed it. I didn't comment on it. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. She had her books in a tote bag beside her chair. I wanted to tell you something, I said. She waited. I accepted a position in Vancouver, I said. She looked at me. Canada. Yes. When? I fly out in 6 weeks to start the onboarding phase, I said. And then I'll be based there for the foreseeable future. She was quiet for a moment. Is this because of us? She asked. It's because of me, I said. The opportunity was real before Dubai. I'd set it aside. Now I'm picking it back up. How long have you been considering it? Seriously, for about 2 weeks, I said. I accepted yesterday. She looked at the table, then back at me. I'm glad, she said. And then, softer, I'm also sad. Both make sense, I said. I know. We drank our tea. She didn't leave right away. We talked for another hour. Not about the relationship or the future. Just talked. The way we used to in the beginning. Before we became people building a shared life and started treating every conversation like a planning meeting. It was, unexpectedly, one of the better conversations we'd had in months. The 6 weeks between that conversation and my departure were strange. Not bad. Strange. Full of the particular quiet of a life being dismantled with care. I gave notice at my firm. My director, a composed Finnish man named Alexei, told me it was a significant loss for the team, but that he understood. He shook my hand for a long time when he said it. Long enough that I felt it. I started selling things I didn't need to bring across an ocean. The sofa that was too big to ship. The bike I'd barely ridden. The coffee table I'd bought at a flea market in the second week of living in my apartment that had served me through 3 relationships in 5 years. Each thing I sold felt like a small decluttering of an older version of myself. Not painful, more like the feeling of a long exhale. Camille and I stayed in touch through that period. Texts mostly, occasional calls. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist. She said it with something like relief, the way you say something when you've been resisting it for a long time and finally gave in. I told her that sounded like a good decision. I meant it. She told me she was working on understanding herself without the mirror of another person. I told her I understood that. I actually did. I'd been doing a version of the same. There's a conversation I need to tell you about. Because it matters. And because I've been circling around it. It happened 3 weeks before I left. I was meeting with an old university friend, Benedict, for drinks in the city. We'd known each other for almost a decade. He was one of the first people I called when Camille and I got engaged. He was honest in the way that only old friends can be. We were on our second round when he looked at me across the table and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," I said. "Were you happy? With Camille?" "With your life," he said. "The whole thing. The job, the engagement, the plan." I thought about it genuinely. "I was content," I said. "That's not the same as happy," he said. "No," I said. "It's not." "So what changed?" he asked. "She said something honest," I said. And it gave me permission to say something honest back, even if only to myself. Benedict nodded. He had that expression he gets when he's absorbing something and not rushing to respond. "She did you a favor," he said finally. "In the hardest possible way," I said. "Yeah," he said. "That's usually how favors like that work." There's something I've been hesitant to say, because it complicates the story, and because it makes me look less like a clean protagonist and more like a person, which is what I actually am. The truth is, and this is the part one sat with for a long time before I understood it, I had my own version of Camille's uncertainty. I just buried it better, or ignored it longer. I was excited about the engagement. I loved her. Both those things were real. But somewhere underneath, there was something I hadn't fully examined. A small, quiet voice that had been asking whether the life I was building was the life I actually wanted, or whether it was the life that made logical sense given the position I'd arrived at. Camille's declaration in that taxi didn't just reveal her uncertainty. It revealed mine. And I think that's why I didn't fight for the relationship in the way I might have in another version of myself. Not because I'd given up, but because somewhere beneath the grief, there was a clarity I hadn't expected. A clarity that felt almost like recognition. Like finding a word for something you felt for a long time, but never named. The night before I left, Camille came over. I told her she didn't have to. She said she wanted to. The apartment was nearly empty. The sofa was gone. The coffee table was gone. I had 2 chairs left and a floor lamp and a bag I'd packed with what I was bringing. She walked in and looked around and said, quietly, "It looks like you already left." "Almost," I said. She sat on one of the chairs. I sat on the other. We were facing each other in an empty room. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do at night. Being busy and bright and indifferent. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "That makes 2 of us," I said. "I think I was scared," she said. "Of what specifically?" I asked. "Of becoming someone I didn't recognize," she said. "And I put that fear on the relationship. I made it about us, when really it was about me." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "I think I knew that in the taxi," I said. "I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet." She smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind that knows things. "Are you angry at me?" she asked. And I checked. Genuinely. "No," I said. "I was sad for a while. But not angry." "You should be," she said. "I asked for a life with you and then panicked about it." "People panic," I said. "Better before the wedding than after." She laughed. "Just briefly." "That's very reasonable of you," she said. "I'm not always reasonable," I said. "I know," she said. "That's part of why I loved you." Past tense. Not cruel. Just honest. The way things that are over should be spoken about. "I loved you too," I said. And then, because it needed to be said, I still do. Just not in a way that requires us to be in the same city. She looked at me for a long moment. "Vancouver suits you," she said. "You've always been someone who needed more horizon than most people." I thought about that. "Maybe," I said. "You're going to be okay," I said. "So are you," she said. She stayed for about 40 minutes. When she left, she stopped in the doorway. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making me the villain," she said. "You were never the villain," I said. "Just a person who needed more time." She nodded. And then she left. And the door closed. And the room was quiet. And the city was still doing its thing outside. And I sat in that empty room with one floor lamp and one bag, and let the whole thing settle into me the way something real does when you finally stop moving long enough to feel it. I landed in Vancouver on a Tuesday morning in October. The air was different immediately, colder and cleaner, and carrying the particular weight of proximity to mountains. Tobias had arranged for someone to meet me at the airport. A junior member of the team, a guy named Felix who was maybe 25 and spoke very fast, and had the enthusiastic energy of someone who genuinely loved their job. He drove me to the temporary housing the firm had arranged. A furnished apartment in Kitsilano with a view of the water and the North Shore Mountains across the bay. I stood at the window for a while when he left. The mountains had snow on them already. The water was that particular gray-green that Pacific water does in autumn. A ferry was crossing the bay, moving slowly and deliberately, going somewhere. I put my bag down. I plugged in my phone. I sent my father a voice note telling him I'd arrived. He replied with a short message that said simply, "The hardest step is always the first day in the new place. After that, it becomes yours." He was right. He usually is. I should tell you about the first few weeks. Not because they were dramatic, because they weren't. And the absence of drama was itself a kind of revelation. The work was exactly what Tobias had described. Complex and demanding and genuinely interesting in the way that work is when it actually matters. I was the second most senior developer on the Corridor project. Above me was a woman named Soraya who had 20 years of infrastructure background across 4 countries and the particular authority of someone who'd been tested by real consequences. She was difficult in the best way. She challenged methodology the way a good coach challenges athletes. Not to undermine, to strengthen. The team was a mix of disciplines and nationalities. There were arguments, good ones, the kind where 2 people care enough about the right answer to fight for it. I hadn't had arguments like that in a long time. I'd been in rooms full of people agreeing toward the path of least resistance. This was different. This felt awake. There were hard nights. I won't pretend otherwise. The first month especially, when the apartment was quiet and the city outside was new and I didn't have the scaffolding of familiar things to hold the evenings up. I thought about Camille, about what we'd had, about the version of the future I'd imagined in the year between proposing and Dubai, the lighthouse on the Normandy coast, the vows I'd started drafting in a note on my phone, the look on my father's face when I told him I was finally doing the thing that people who figured themselves out do. I felt the absence of all that. I let myself feel it. I didn't drink through it or run from it or call someone to talk me out of it. I just felt it. And then I made dinner, or went for a walk along the seawall, or called Benedict and let him tell me about the completely unrelated chaos of his own life until I was laughing at something inconsequential. Grief isn't a problem to solve. It's a process to respect. I was learning to respect it. 2 months after I arrived, Camille sent me a long message. It came on a Sunday afternoon when I was having coffee and reading something I won't remember. She told me she'd been working hard with her therapist. She told me she'd started to understand what the figuring out had actually been about. She told me it had a lot more to do with her childhood patterns around independence and control than it had ever had to do with me specifically. She said she was sorry, again. Not the apologetic sorry of someone trying to avoid consequences. The sorry of someone who has done the work and finally understands the impact of what they did. She told me she hoped Vancouver was good. She told me she'd heard it was beautiful in the autumn. She told me that if I was ever back in Europe, she hoped we could have coffee, as whatever we'd become. I read it 3 times. And then I wrote back. I told her I was glad she was doing the work. I told her I was glad I'd come here. I told her coffee sounded good, someday, in whatever city and whatever version of ourselves that turned out to be. And I told her something I'd been thinking for a while. I told her the taxi ride through Dubai had probably been the most important conversation we'd ever had. Not because it ended things, but because it was the first moment either of us had been fully honest with each other since the engagement. And honesty, even when it hurts, is better than a comfortable lie that has a 30-year lease. She wrote back 2 words. I know. I've been in Vancouver 8 months now. The Corridor project is past its first major milestone. We broke ground on the northern section 2 weeks ago. There's a photograph somewhere in the site documentation of the team at the groundbreaking. I'm in it, slightly at the edge of the frame, which is where I generally prefer to be. Soraya is at the center, of course, looking like someone who has spent decades earning exactly this moment. I look, and I say this because it surprised me when I saw it. I look like someone who's where they're supposed to be, not performing it, just there. I've explored the city in pieces. The way you learn a city when you've actually moved there rather than just visited. The grocery store with the good sourdough. The seawall section that faces directly west toward the sunset. The coffee shop on Main Street with the grumpy barista who makes the best flat white I've had outside of Australia. The hiking trails on the North Shore that are exactly the right amount of difficult. The ferry to the island on a clear Saturday morning when the light hits the water in a way that makes you stop pretending you're not moved by it. It's mine, this city. Still new enough to surprise me. Already familiar enough to feel like home. People have asked me, since then, whether I regret it. The engagement. The time with Camille. The years I invested in something that didn't go where I thought it would. The honest answer is no. Not because I'm performing forgiveness or demonstrating enlightenment. Because I actually don't. She was a good person in the wrong moment. Or maybe I was. Or maybe we were both exactly right for each other for exactly as long as we were. And then the seasons changed, and we needed different things, and the graceful thing to do was to acknowledge it before we did real damage trying to force continuance. Some relationships end. Not because they were mistakes, but because they were complete. From a taxi in Dubai to an apartment in Vancouver is a long distance to travel on the back of one honest sentence. But here I am. And the mountains are ridiculous. And the water is gray-green. And there's a project being built that will move people from one place to another more efficiently than before. And there's a version of me living here who found out, later than he expected, that contentment and happiness are not the same thing. And who is grateful, genuinely, quietly, without performance, for the honesty of a woman who looked at a Dubai skyline instead of at him and told him the truth anyway. Even if neither of them knew, sitting in that taxi, that it was exactly what they both needed to hear.